Okay, DMV, Maryland, DC. Where's everybody else from? Georgia? Okay. ATL or another part?
Okay, Utah. Hey.
Yes. All right.
Yes, definitely in the chat. Make sure you're sending your messages to panelists and attendees. Otherwise, we won't be able to see, everyone in the audience won't be able to see. Thanks. Lisa. Hey, Patrice. Thanks for joining from Canada.
Canada. Oh, wow. Everybody here. Okay. Here is the Padlet. All right, so everybody on this link I'm dropping, this is called Padlet. It's basically an interactive, almost like posting board. So if everybody wants to formally introduce themselves more, drop your name, your pronouns, where you're based, and answer the question, when you hear environmental liberation, what comes to mind? Let us know. And we'll get into introducing Generation Green as you all fill out the Padlet. Ayana, do you want to tell folks what Generation Green is and a little bit about what we do?
Sure. So Generation Green is a Black youth-led organization that is fostering youth leadership in the environmental liberation movement. We are an intergenerational community, and we use our platform and network to do diaspora organizing. And yeah, we're here for everybody Black, everything Black, and making sure that Black folks are able to be liberated through their environments, and making sure that we are using the proper frame and lens when looking at climate issues, looking at environmental issues, and understanding that the root causes of those issues are the historical injustices of capitalism, colonialism, and white supremacy. So we take a little bit of a different stance on approaching what is, when it comes to Black people's relationship to the environment. So we'll get into that once we start explaining environmental liberation. But I'll hand it off to Destiny to tell you a little bit about how we started.
Yeah, so we started in 2019, technically, like the very end of 2019 during winter break. I was an intern at a Big Green, and I was like, this ain't for me. Where the Black folks at? I had several coworkers and colleagues and just folks that I met who were just experiencing so much harm in the space. Didn't really enjoy their jobs anymore, or were doing things outside of their job description. And I was like, this is not a safe space for Black folks, especially not Black youth. I want to change that. Like, I want to build a space for us where we do this work through our lens and center our Blackness, our lives, and really find out, what does environment mean to us, and redefine that. And so that's kind of what happened. I filed the paperwork for Generation Green, hit up some folks that I was organizing with on Howard's campus, such as Jalen, Ayana, and some other people, and was like, hey, I want to build a space for Black youth to do this work. What's up? Y'all down? And they were like, yeah. So we met for the first time all together at the beginning of 2020, and things just kept going from there. Of course, COVID, interrupted a lot of things. So we got back together last summer, and launched in August. So this was initially created as a space for Black youth to do this work, to connect during this work, and just build off of it. And it's still that, but it's grown into so much more, into what Ayana just described. And now we have environmental liberation. Yeah. So let's get into it. What is environmental liberation, and what will we be doing during this call? So still introduce yourselves in the Padlet. Please don't forget to do that. Let everybody know who you are, where you're from. You can add a gift. We love gifts. And when you hear environmental liberation, what comes to mind? We'll be then introducing, of course, EL in general. What's the difference between environmental liberation and environmental justice? I know folks are probably wondering that. What is our EL manifesto? And kind of, we want to hear from you all on the points that we go through and what you think that is and what we mean. I'll let Ayana start off by getting into what EL is.
Yes. So environmental liberation, or EL for short, is Generation Green's foundational ideological framework that is posed to claim a decolonized, regenerative, and autonomous future for Black people. So EL as a framework critically analyzes the injustices in the environment of the Black experience. And like I said before, these things stem from colonialism, racial capitalism, white supremacy, etc. So this framework seeks to return us to our ancestral connection and relationship with the earth. So some of the components of environmental liberation are, one, that is for and by Black people. We can't stress that enough. We know y'all gonna make sure to speak up and say that when you hear it being brought up in different spaces. EL has an Afrocentric lens, and it sees Blackness through the lens of decolonial border thinking, meaning that, we understand the entire diaspora is not a monolith, but we have shared experiences in the ways that we are disproportionately affected and used as sacrifices when it comes to the environment, or environmental burden specifically. So EL also centers Afro-indigeneity and ancestral ways of knowing, which is really important, especially as we're looking towards how can we start to address some of these issues in a way that is culturally appropriate and relevant. And then, EL uses a historical analysis and a cultural one to critically analyze injustices that have happened, and just like linking that to the environmental degradation and climate change that we're seeing today, right? Because to be honest, it extends further beyond the Industrial Revolution, right? Because when you place the onset of climate change at the Industrial Revolution, you're kind of missing out on what led us to this global system, this world system, right? And it really started off with the exploitation and the colonialization and plunder of the global North on the backs of the global South. So it's really important that we have that analysis included in this framework. EL is radical and revolutionary. So it radicalizes individuals with the lens that, we need, at this juncture, we need existential, we need holistic and transformative change. We can't just, the way that climate change is, looking to really decimate the global South, like we can't just, it's not enough to just, okay, we're gonna have this emission target and, we're gonna use some different forms of energy. It really needs to be a transformative change from every part of our economies and our political systems. And we just really need to put an end to, oppression and exploitation of all kinds, because that is what led us to this moment. So that is something that's emphasized in this framework. And then furthermore, EL transcends systems. So environmental liberation, we engage in policy, we engage in power building by focusing on agenda setting and just developing the cohesion within our own communities, focusing on community control. So we engage with state and government actors as it's necessary and as it's beneficial, but our work is not just limited to getting a certain bill introduced in the House, right? If that happens to align very well with, the goals that and the agendas that our communities have set, okay. But this is not just a political movement or something that can be resolved in one piece of legislation or anything like that. So we transcend systems. And part of what we do is like, okay, how can we create regenerative systems? Like, that's something we hope that you all can brainstorm and think about today. Like, what does environmental liberation it manifested? What does that look like? What systems are at play there that we can all ideate on and create moving forward? And then lastly, Jen Green's plan, our EL Manifesto. So basically, the EL framework allows us to assess like what we need. And the plan that we've outlined allows us to go ahead and, assess like, okay, what do we need for environmental liberation? Like, what are the different components? So we'll get into that. But basically, we organize and mobilize around those things accordingly. So Destiny, I'm gonna hand it off. Oh, well, actually, really quick, I'm gonna go over the difference between EL and EJ just to clarify any confusion over, what the two terms mean and, are they the same thing? Are they different? I want to clarify that before we get into the manifesto. So here are some key things that we felt was important to distinguish between environmental liberation and environmental justice. I want to preface this by saying we respect and really value and admire the work that EJ elders and pioneers have done in this movement, getting it to this point. We think that, the early environmental justice movement was extremely radical and just groundbreaking. So it is that all of that that has allowed us to, kind of build upon and continue this work and build upon the environmental justice framework. But here are some ways that we would like to continue to evolve that framework. So basically, ivory tower. So this is an issue that we've identified when it comes to environmental justice. So basically, the EL movement is youth-led and it's just people-led, right? Just like your everyday community member. We've observed that a lot of the leaders in EJ are mainly in academia. They're based in academia, or they're an environmental professional. Like, this is what they do as their career. So what the problem is, environmental justice knowledge, data, and just understanding, kind of like what environmental justice is, like all of that becomes trapped in like an ivory tower. That knowledge isn't distributed in a democratic way, right? Like, it's hard to just ask, an everyday person to really break down, what environmental justice is, right? So that makes the movement less accessible. And that's something we are trying to avoid when it comes to environmental liberation, right? We want folks to be able to get out on the streets and, protest and like be there show up for environmental liberation the same way that we show up for different social justice issues. But unfortunately, it seems that, with environmental justice, it's more of okay, this is like, let's do a study on this. Let's, like have a bill on this. And it's not like everyday common knowledge informed by our experiences. Another thing is that sometimes environmental justice work is very based on working with the state, working with the government, the EPA, and neoliberal policies, reformist policies. And that is, while sometimes it's necessary, I'm a policy person myself, so I understand that sometimes that is necessary, but it's just simply not going to give us liberation, right? So it's just not HR, whatever, that's not going to liberate us. We know that we need, like I said before, a radical and transformational change in order to resolve the environmental issues that are amounting to a slow genocide for Black folks, quite honestly. So that is one thing that we do a little bit differently. We really focus on the community, which leads me to my next point, diaspora organizing. We really don't, in Generation Green, we really don't see borders, honestly. We're in contact in community, and we organize with Black folks throughout the diaspora, wherever they are, and care about the environmental issues that they're facing just as much as we do with folks here in the United States. So we don't have this American or like global North kind of like focus, really. But unfortunately, seems like in EJ, can be very focused on what's going on in the States and not looking at, the relationship of progress, right? Progress in the global North in America when it comes to environmental justice and, actually looking into the global South and seeing how things are just like externalities are just being shifted to the global South. So while, maybe there's an environmental justice site, hazardous waste site being cleaned up in a city somewhere in the South, it might be just being moved. That waste might just be moved to Ghana or to somewhere in the Caribbean now. So it's like, is that really an environmental justice win if an externality is just being shifted somewhere else in the global South? That's really something that we consider. And then lastly, Black youth. So environmental liberation is led by Black youth or Black young people. This is an intergenerational movement, but we really think that successful movements for social change have to be youth-led, right? Or they have to include youth, right? And train youth up to carry on the baton. So that's something that we focus on, Generation Green focuses on. And obviously, we're inheriting the future of this planet. So that's another reason why we have that focus.
Yeah, so if people have any questions about environmental liberation, please use the Q&A function. This is your time. We want to answer everybody's questions on environmental liberation as an ideological framework. While you guys dropped it, I'll kind of continue to synthesize. So as everything Ayana mentioned, it's no hate to the EJ movement. If you take anything out of this, please take that we are not bashing the environmental justice movement, anybody in it, or disrespecting it in any way. Much respect, and we use very much the principles and things of environmental justice as our foundation. So if you take anything, please take that. But there are some observations and there are some problems with accessibility and translating things in the context of having a movement, having an ideology that is for and by Black people, and that centers Black liberation and that notes that self-determination, meaning us, our sovereignty, us having the ability to make decisions for and by us and control our destinies is what will liberate us. And so while environmental justice is wonderful, and while it has spread across the world and become a movement for and by people of color, it is really, really, really important that we have a movement for and by Black people, considering that we are all across the world in the diaspora, and we have very unique environmental experiences, many similar based on how we have been racialized in this society with global racial capitalism and everything like that. I think it was very interesting what you all put in the Padlet before we, got into it, what you think or what you thought environmental liberation was. I'll read some off. Natalie says environmental liberation seems like a focus on environmental issues that understands the impact and influence of whiteness and capitalism in other environmental spaces. Okay. Celine said environmental liberation goes beyond just a justice approach, but total sovereignty of all Indigenous people. And yes, Black as in Indigenous, period. It's anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, decolonial. Okay, period. Celine.
You could write it at this point. You could write the Yale Manifesto. We gonna contact you.
Look, Celine got it. She got a lot. Jalen says, when I hear environmental liberation, I think of this Thomas Sankara quote: the struggle for the trees and the forest is an anti-imperialist struggle. Imperialism is the arsonist of our forest and our savannas. Yes, Thomas Sankara, if you don't know who that is, please Google Burkina Faso, man-led a revolution, and a word, and basically told the UN that they ain't. But I love to hear from you guys. Keep dropping in the Padlet. Jalen, you want to take us to the Q&A? What are folks asking?
Great question, Destiny. Folks aren't asking. We need to ramp up the questions. Oh, I stand corrected. Zika Lee asks, how do we create a Pan-African community focused on the same environmental playbook? I'm in Seattle, but it's not too Afro up here. So I feel underrepresented and out of connection. So we're going to answer this question live.
Yes. Jayla, do you want to answer that as our diaspora engagement director? We can also answer, but I think you could probably get the best answer to that.
Oh, gee. Okay. Well, Zeke, I say that it's important to start looking at who are the Black people around you? And are they interested in environment? If not, they probably are, but they're not posing it that way. I think a lot of Black people start with the social justice lens, and then they realize that if police brutality and white violence and inequality, general inequality, socioeconomic inequality is all around me, then what is my environment? Generation Green defines your environment as your immediate surroundings. So it's very hard to be concerned about ice caps melting as Black people when your family structure is being attacked and you're being gunned down in the street. So I think framing the environment culturally relevant to Black communities in Seattle will be so important. Talking about the environment in a way that makes sense is so important. And through doing that, through breaking down those barriers, you will find yourself building or being a part of a more Pan-African community focused on the environment. Generation Green also will be making the environmental liberation manifesto available on our website. Destiny will get into that later. So if you do build a reading group or a club or whatever that looks like for communities in Seattle, Generation Green has resources to definitely share. And you can always contact us at info@gen-green.org. And I'll drop that in the chat so you can have that readily available.
That part. I'll add to that and saying, which I think Jalen said it too, and this goes back to the environmental justice definition of environment, which, as Jalen said, is the complex interactions of the social, physical, political, economic, biological, et cetera, factors in your immediate surroundings and how they impact you, your ability to survive, and even just mature and grow as an organism. And so when we think about that, our Black bodies are environments. And this is why environmental liberation is so important, because we have to change that narrative. We have to center our narrative when we talk about environment. because the mainstream movement is whitewashed, as we know, the mainstream climate and environmental movement. And what does that do for us? So when we talk about it, we have to change the narrative, change the tone, change the definitions. We have to redefine it and reclaim it, because Black folks and Indigenous folks are the blueprint for which all of these things concerning environment, these movements were created from. So I think that's a really important piece too, is the narrative and the culture behind that.
Yes, yes. Thank you for speaking to the narrative. And just something I'd like to add is that, the whole myth of, oh, Black people they don't really care about the environment. They're not really connected to the environment. That is, the fact that people have that sentiment is really an evidence of white supremacy and colonization, because how can we, like, our environments are treated as sacrifice zones. We don't have environments that are for our pleasure, for us to thrive, for us to have recreation. Like, we have to survive our environments. We have to try our best to survive our environments. So when you're dumping in our environments, when we're being exposed to extreme heat, we don't have, basic life needs, and we also are subject to violence in our environment. What we gonna do? Like, we supposed to just be kumbaya outside, like giddy? No. So like, that is something that we need to get into. Like, why don't Black, like, if and that's not true, because Black people love the outdoors, right? Just as much as anyone. But the fact that we have to deal with so much more to just have that peace in nature is a serious issue. So that's something that environmental liberation really dives into. And the goal is to allow us to thrive and flourish in our environments, as opposed to what we currently experience.
Nice. Okay. So Zeke said, the lens shift, the immediacy of environment in definition, all supremely helpful. I am grateful, that part. So thank you. I'm glad we were able to answer your question, and we will get into Fuchsia's question. How would, like those of us no longer considered youth, to support Generation Green? So how would we like our elders and our Gen Xers and our millennials to get involved with Generation Green?
Yeah. Okay. So this is not just a youth space only. It's intergenerational, but we acknowledge the importance of being Black youth led, because what is a movement without youth? And historically, we have seen movements started and led by youth, and they may or may not have been sustained if they didn't have youth still present. So this is not just us, but we lead. So we want to engage with everybody. We really, really center communal learning. So community learning, building community, just sharing all the knowledge that we have. We're going to get into it in a bit, but one of our main goals here is to connect the diaspora and to have a diasporic ecosystem where we can share resources. And by resources, I mean knowledge, information, actual physical assets, people, et cetera, so that we can liberate ourselves. So we want to communicate with everybody. So Jalen can drop our diasporic ecosystem census, and you can start connecting with us by first filling that out. That'll let us know where you at, how you want to engage with us, and we can follow up from there. But we're building out working groups. We're building out a curriculum. We are building out community learning networks. And so there's much, much more to come, but you can start by first filling out the census, and then we can go from there into how you specifically want to engage with us.
Awesome. Okay. We have a really great question from Celine. It says, you mentioned that Generation Green does diasporic organizing. How do y'all ensure that it does not come from a saviorism approach, understanding that the US, Canada, we still live in a settler colonial state and benefit from the harm caused by these settler states in places like Palestine, Congo, and Ethiopia? So I will take a stab at that question because this is a part of the work that I do at Generation Green. And this was a big question. I'm like, but I'm an American. Like, what can I say? Like, I don't get to say where my taxes go. Like, it just happens. And then here I am supporting the military industrial complex that is killing my cousins, you know? Um, but it takes a moment to realize, okay, but yes, I live in a settler colonial state. Therefore, I am colonized in this state. And like Palestinians, like Ethiopians, like the Congolese, I am being colonized. A lot of Black people are indigenous to this land. We are being colonized. We are colonized on this land. There's a lot of harm happening here too. And when you start to realize your environment in that context, you have to start moving like your brothers and sisters abroad. You cannot move like an American. You have to recognize your privilege and go, yes, my American passport allows me to go here and there. I need to be mobilizing resources when I travel. I need to ask my brothers and sisters abroad, what do you need? And that was the first step in Generation Green's diasporic organizing. We define that as grassroots organizing, cultural organizing, and digital organizing. So we use the internet, being social media, to connect with people abroad, organizers abroad, and just communities abroad who are keeping their culture alive and safe from imperialism the best that they can. And that was our first point of contact. We did not go straight to government entities or NGOs working with the UN. We went straight to people and asked people, how can Generation Green get involved? Does Generation Green even need to be involved? And those are much better conversations. But I think the first step to kind of mitigating that feeling of like saviorism is to realize that you really can't even function like that. You can either perpetuate militarism by readily being available to be a tool to the US government, the Canadian government, whatever global north government you're living under, or you can decide that you want liberation and you're going to do whatever it takes to unite throughout the diaspora and create this little informal commonwealth of Black people around the world. So it's really a network that you are putting yourself within. Um, Once you start realizing I'm a colonized person on this land, I was stolen and my people are being killed. So it's kind of like that double consciousness because at the end of the day, you do have a US passport, but in the US, in Canada, we are being killed. So um yes, it is that dual consciousness and it is hard, but you have to decolonize your mind before you start doing this work. And I think the first thing is doing um, the work to realize that you are a colonized person as well. I hope that answered the question. And if anybody else would like to add.
That was a beautiful answer, Jalen. That was extremely thorough and chef's kiss. So thank you for that answer. I just if I can add just one little thing is that, makes Generation Green and our approach to diaspora organizing distinct is instead of like some of these white environmental organizations, instead of trying to be somebody's savior or engaging in saviorism, what we're trying to do is build solidarity, right? Because like Jalen said, we all kind of experience the burden of these environmental issues. So we're trying to figure out, hey, like, what are you doing in your community? What can we do together? How can do we share goals? Do we share an agenda? How can we act on this together in concert so that we're doing this? We're coming from a place of power, right? And solidarity and unity when we're addressing these things. So it's really like we have to acknowledge our privilege, of course. And that's why, we figure out whatever we can do to redistribute resources, to give folks our platform so that they can, folks in the global south can, make their demand and, get more visibility. But it's really about solidarity, right? And then like also, what was my second point? Also, Actually, I'll remember my second point. But yeah, thank you, Jalen. That was perfect. And yeah, I hope that it seems like that answered your question, Celine.
Yeah, I also want to add, you should just stroke my mind that while doing this work, you cannot be under the impression that the Global South needs you. You cannot be under that impression. When we started Generation Green, we weren't under the impression that we are needed in the Global South. So that saviorism complex is kind of abolished right there. We're figuring out how we're going to get our cousins to love us and build community. So yeah, we are not needed. People have the knowledge to do this without us. We just want to be a part of that, and we want colonized people in the global north to be a part of that supply chain, that network. So yeah, that's the kind of work we do at Generation Green, and I'm a put this question as answered. The next question is from Darian Mercado. What are some ways we can motivate Black folks to research and ponder on systems and concepts outside of the walls of capitalism? For example, African communism and Ubuntu.
I have an Ubuntu tattoo. That's just the first thing that comes to my mind. But how we can get people to ponder and explore. I think the number one thing is like decolonizing the mind. You know, not only do we have to decolonize literally everything, but we must start with ourselves, with our mind. And it's extremely hard, especially when there's a whole education system that is not an education system, it's indoctrination. I'm from the South, and I very often just look back on my education like, wow, the Daughters of the Confederacy really did that. They did that. But ways we can get folks to ponder and explore. Well, first, folks have to know it exists, right? You know, I think that's like the number one thing. Growing up, I didn't know, you know, what was going on the continent. I didn't know that the Arab and Indian Ocean slave trade existed. I didn't know that like the list goes on and on and on because nobody told me. So this is where community knowledge sharing or community learning really comes into play personally, is if you know something, tell somebody. You know, we can't have our brothers and sisters out here ignorant to who we are, you know, and is it their fault? Not when this whole system is built to keep us indoctrinated and suppressed. So if we have the knowledge, we should share it, you know. Not everybody's a teacher, so I'm not going to tell you how to share it, but we should share that knowledge, and we should be in spaces like this and spaces that Generation Green is building so that we can continue to share that and be like, oh, let's discover some things together, you know, because I'm very much like a dot connector. And I think many people are, you know, there's rabbit holes like with conspiracy theories and things. Well, let's go down a rabbit hole into our history, our systems, our philosophies, our ideas, our principles as African people. And like once you start, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. Let me, you know, or you can help somebody through that. So I think community learning is a really big thing. Historically in the Black community, we've had sages who, you know, pass down the knowledge and make sure that everybody in the community is informed, especially passing it on to the younger generation. And because global racial capitalism, white supremacy is as pervasive as it is, that blueprint has not always continued. And we need to change that. You know, we need to spread the knowledge. We need to do the study. As Kwame Ture and Charles B. Hamilton says, a revolutionary studies. Malcolm X said it too. A revolutionary must study. So we must know, and we must spread that information amongst our brothers and sisters. I am looking at the time. So it looks like we should move on into what is the Environmental Liberation Manifesto. So the EL framework, which we all just got into, that ideology, that ideological framework, you know, guides us to secure the demands that we have listed in our manifesto, which furthers Black liberation, especially where it connects to land, environment, climate, and place. In order to secure and support the components of the manifesto, Africans, as in Black folks everywhere, need assets, new infrastructure, systems change, and sovereignty. Generation Green's community building process fortifies this to build collective power and secure the manifesto throughout the African diaspora. So we are working to bring folks together across the diaspora like this, but in a communal space, and to be like, hey, what do you have going on over there? What do you have going on over there? What are your strategies? You know, oh, we're dealing with the same thing. Let's link up and let's build an agenda together. You know, we can't always be mobilizing without organizing. We have to come together. We have to connect, build community, especially as a diaspora, and be like, what do we want? You know, and then, hey, what's everybody's role? My role might not be the same as your role because my skills might be different, my personality is different, my experience is different. And then let's figure out what we want to change, and where we're going. And then let's mobilize people. Let's get the mass, let's get everybody to pull up. And that's truly how we liberate ourselves. And so that's what we're trying to do at Generation Green when it comes to the manifesto. So we have 8 points: sovereignty, land, habitable environment, holistic health and wellness, housing, energy, education, and abolition. Now, there are many, 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 many subcategories to these things. So we can get into that, but we also want to know what you think as we go through these. So in the Padlet, I can drop the Padlet once more. If you guys, you know, as we go over a point, if you think about something like sovereignty, what is that? Or energy, what is that? And what are some examples of that in my localized community? What are some examples of that, you know, in the diaspora? How can we make this a thing? Go ahead and drop that in the Padlet. So we can get right into it. I apologize, this is still on camera. Sovereignty. So sovereignty is the ability to declare who you are and live life without fear of harm. Environmental liberation must be achieved through having the ability to claim and maintain sovereignty by being able to decide what best suits our communities and our families. Sovereignty is achieved through self-determination and aided by resistance, abolition, and armed self-defense if necessary. Usually it is. Safety, community-created systems for protection, is integral to sovereignty. We achieve this by instilling knowledge and power to Black people so they can have choices to live as they please without fear of violence, being poisoned, lack of resources, and more. Self-governance and community control are rooted in the ability to determine our collective destinies. By cultivating political and economic power, we are able to attain freedom from oppression, imperialism, and exploitation. Kwame Ture has said that the first law of revolution is the law of self-sufficiency, sovereignty. So go ahead, drop in the Padlet if you're thinking, if your mind is turning, what does sovereignty mean to you? Did we get it right? And what does that look like? You know, what does that look like at a diaspora level, at a localized level? What are you thinking? We want to know. But these are just kind of some bullet points of basically what I just read off, you know, political power, economic power, frontline response, rapid response. We're talking about reparations, climate, and slavery, or labor rather, all packaged in one. We can't, you know, pull those apart, considering that the system, global racial capitalism, is what has created the climate crisis, and that started and uses labor as its basis. Yeah, and protected status for climate refugees, decolonial borders, all of that. So that's what we're talking about when we say sovereignty. Ayana, you want to take it away with land?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, sure thing. So, 1 second. Okay. So land is the ground that you walk on. Land gives us food to eat, clothes to wear, water to drink, and a place to live. Currently, access to sovereign land is interrupted by colonization, is interrupted by climate change, capitalism, and fossil fuel extraction to power the systems that we listed, the aforementioned systems. So we need to create systems that offer reparation, reclamation, and repatriation to place Black people in wherever we want to be honest, but primarily in the land that we were stolen from, if we so choose. So it may just have to be taken forcibly if negotiation doesn't work, or just like, or I would say just, you know, really through a self-determination mindset and attitude, you know, because we shouldn't have to beg for what is rightfully ours and where our ancestors lay, right? So I have a quote here from Malcolm X. Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis for all independence. land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. So some of the things that we're including within this section of the plan is ancestral land reclamation, like I mentioned, land reparations, returning of ancestral land, and community land. Like, again, if people, don't want to return to where their ancestors are from, even just in their communities that they're currently in, having a degree of sovereignty and control on the land that they're in, right? Realizing that, when it comes to America, this is stolen land. So again, that's going to require some solidarity and being in community with Indigenous folks and figuring out how can we go about this together, right? When it comes to that. Also within this is agriculture, regenerative, sustainable agriculture, ending the unethical extraction of resources and minerals, which a lot of times are just straight up stolen. The labor is stolen and the mineral is stolen. And it's very degrading to the environment too. Building resilient and restorative infrastructure. And when we say infrastructure, this is actually talking about very physical infrastructure. And, like how can we have the land be resilient enough to withstand disaster? So that, folks are not just displaced and, completely devastated. And then freedom from toxic land use and facilities. That is pretty much says it all. But abolish toxic land use, period. And Destiny, if you want to do habitable environment, you can.
Yeah, also remember y'all, dropping the palette, what you're thinking. There's a question in there on sovereignty. What does that look like at a local and diaspora level, as well as land? But next we have habitable environment, which is climate, clean water, air, and waste. So a habitable planet is hospitable environment recovered from harm. Earth is our livelihood. We ain't got a choice. Okay, most folks, especially Black folks, do not have the luxury of flying to Mars to find another planet to sustain life on. We got Earth right here, and we got to make that work. And we got to make it work for us so that we thrive. So fighting for societal change needs to include the health of our planet that nurtures us. Otherwise, we will cease to exist. Expertise on sustainable and regenerative systems need to be gathered from Indigenous people, frontline communities, and reclaimed from academia for public use. We demand the abolition and accountability of private and government entities that have historically been poisoning and depleting the planet without regard for future generations and non-human life forms. Woo, y'all, yeah, we getting into it. It's real, because if we don't have a planet, what is any of this for? What good is being liberated if you have nowhere to be liberated? If you have no land, in which land is everything, land is freedom. If you have no air to breathe, that means you wouldn't even be here. So this includes policies that safeguard the environment, climate adaptation and mitigation, climate future and resilience, free, universal, and sustainable recycling, abolish plastics and hazardous waste export, holistic water infrastructure restoration, elimination of air, water, and land pollutants, record, reparate, and reverse legacy pollution and cumulative health impacts. Yeah, so that is Habitable Planet. Ayana, holistic health and wellness.
Okay, so holistic health and wellness is a radical declaration that you choose your health outcomes rather being subject to them. We want affordable, accessible, and community regulated, decolonized healthcare, okay? Period. You cannot liberate yourself if you're malnourished, if you're depleted and diseased. It's just not possible. People should have access to affordable, holistic, and ancestral methods of care. We must decolonize health and prioritize the protection, care, and validity of differently abled bodies. So access to healthy food is the cornerstone of good health and wellness. Our communities must be empowered with the ability to sustain healthy and nutrient-rich diets with food that is free from environmental degradation. So some of the points we're including in this is indigenous medicine, medical racism and colonized healthcare, obviously healthy food and nutrition, expanding sustainable food programs for Black farmers and communities, abolishing food apartheids, abolishing decolonized methods of agriculture and food systems, monocropping, GMO, pesticides. That stuff is killing us, you know? And then fat phobia, realizing that it is perfectly okay for there to be different types of bodies and that you can be healthy like at any size. And what's important is health. That's the important thing here. So I just feel like I'm drinking this little green juice, and I just feel like it's environmental liberation because I found this at a farmer's market, and it was a Black owned company. So I went over there, I was like, hey queen, like what you selling? And it's just like all types of like kale and Swiss chard and ginger. So I just feel like environmental liberation drinking this. And it's called Fight Juice. So shout out to them. But that's what we mean by holistic health and wellness. And I'll pass it off to Dusty. Oh, and there's a few other points, like, eliminating chemical exposure, toxin exposure, when it comes to reproductive justice, beauty justice, even, the products that we use like on our hair, on our skin, on our in our homes, are full of endocrine disruptors, developmental toxins, carcinogens. And that stuff is like killing us, and it's like a slow genocide, and it's just disproportionately found in the products that we use, right? So all of that goes under holistic health.
Yeah, so people at the time, y'all had questions and we got into it. But to keep going, there's only a couple more points. Housing is a human right. We need protection from the elements, harm, and displacement. So this housing should be safe, i.e. weatherized and free of contamination, resilient, habitable, and free. The quality of living conditions should not be determined by your level of income. I'm gonna say that again. The quality of living conditions should not be determined by your level of income. This would require dismantling the capitalist system that treats housing as a vehicle for acquiring profit and not a basic necessity. We get rid of profit over people. Ayana, you want to take energy?
Yes, super briefly. So energy is power. It fuels all parts of human life. So we need an equitable and swift transition to renewable energy that is truly clean, that does not take capitalistic supply chains and fossil fuels to produce, right? So there's no liberation without, communities being able to control their source of energy. So the best way to, that is really the best thing to make sure that energy supplies are clean, non-extractive, and democratized. And then Destiny, go ahead and do education.
Yeah, these are the last two, education and abolition. So if you got questions, also go ahead and drop them. We'll do a quick Q&A after this because I know we're a minute over, but y'all had some great questions earlier. So if you got thoughts, drop them in the Q&A so we can hit them after this. Education is access to knowledge, not indoctrination. I gave you an example of that earlier. People need to decolonize their minds and access imagination in order to be liberated. We need curriculums adapted and tailored to every entry point. That's in the home, the daycare, after school, and all levels of learning. We need to shift knowledge from elite institutional standards to create conducive environments for community knowledge sharing, along with infrastructure to ensure accessibility for different learning abilities, styles, languages, technology, so on and so forth. Black youth and elders should have access to environmental education that equips them with the data that demystifies their environmental conditions while also teaching skills that allow them to confidently navigate their environments. And lastly, we got abolition. Ayana.
I'm so sorry. I was distracted reading Zeke's comment in the chat. And yes, Ashe, thank you for that. So quickly, abolition. We know, all of us in this room already know that the clearest solutions on matters of social and environmental liberation point to abolition of oppressive systems and structures. So the vehicles of abolition will require us to redirect the facets of these oppressive systems, toward community efforts that ensure holistic care, harmony, wealth, safety, self-determination, and nourishing environments. So that means defunding, demilitarizing, dismantling, and decolonizing, period, right? So when evaluating the widespread environmental degradation and climate change that disproportionately affects us, we are able to identify the root causes. Like I said, goes way prior to the Industrial Revolution. And we understand that we need an abolitionist and holistic understanding to approach these climate solutions, because climate change at the end of the day is an amalgamation of social ills. And I'll drop the mic there.
Ooh, mic drop. But that is our EL manifesto, y'all. And this is something that we want to continue to build with everyone. So that's why we're having, these working groups that we're coming up with, and in the future a Congress for folks to convene in. This is why we're having a space like this to explain what we got going on. This is why we're building a curriculum and building learning networks, because we need to figure out, okay, we just kind of categorize, what's needed for Black folks to thrive, to not just survive, but thrive. But what does that look like? We gave examples, but that's different for every community. That's different for every person. So we need to come together as a diaspora and figure out what's our agenda for sovereignty. Look, what we got to do. They did it in the Pan-African Congress back in the 1900s to liberate themselves. Neocolonialism happened after that, but we need to do that again. What do we want as a people, as a diaspora? What does it take? What do we have when it comes to resources? What do we need? What do we not have? What is everybody's role and where we're going? We can't be mobilizing sporadically forever, because that's not going to liberate us. And so this manifesto is just the start. It's just the foundation. Environmental liberation is our ideology, our ideals, our principles, our values. What is a movement without an ideology? What is a people without an ideology? And this manifesto is just the framework for us to figure out our needs and come together and do that. Yeah, I know we're 5 minutes over, Jalen. I don't know what's going on in the chat. I don't know if people had thoughts or questions or anything like that.
Yes. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, y'all, for sticking on. I see actually an increased amount of people that we had in this space. So thank you for sticking till the very end. Thank you for taking an hour out of your Saturday to talk about environmental liberation. This is beautiful. This is exactly the spaces that regenerate me and that I love to be in. So thank you so much. We hope that y'all enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take time to rest. Take time to tend to your wellness, right? Because we need everyone to be well and whole for when the revolution comes. Get you some green juice, get you some fight juice, and let's get it popping. And then Jalen, I don't know if you want to say anything before we log off.
Thank you guys for coming. This was live streamed on YouTube. So if you want to rewatch this, think about it, let the ideas ruminate. You can look at it on our YouTube channel, Generation Green. And also, we are trying to raise $20,000 for our work in Kenya. We are mobilizing with the Kenyan Action Network to teach kids in Mombasa how to compost. We're out there supporting their Africa is Not a Dumpster campaign, and we are attending the Climate Justice School with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance to let them know Black kids care about the environment too. So be sure to take our census and slide us $1. And I'll leave our donation link. Oh, Destiny's already on it. Yeah, anything, even share it with your friends who got money. Generation Green is trying to do the work, but the work, unfortunately, needs fiat currency behind it. So let's go. Let's do this.
Thank y'all. Have a great day. Click that census. Real talk. We want to connect with you. If you want to connect with us, that's the way.